Welcome to another episode of A Walk Through Philippians. We are going to be today looking at part one of the last few verses of the first chapter of the book of Philippians, verse 27 to 30. And next time we'll look at parts two of this and then move into chapter 2 of Philippians, God willing. Philippians 1:27 to 30. Let's just jump straight in and look at that together. Philippians chapter 1, verse 27. Just one thing. As citizens of heaven, live your life worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or am absent, I will hear about you that you are standing firm in one spirit, in one accord, contending together for the faith of the gospel, not being frightened in any way by your opponents. This is a sign of destruction for them, but of your salvation, and this is from God. For it has been granted to you on Christ's behalf, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are engaged in the same struggle that you saw I had, and now hear that I have. And so we know the context, even as we land that passage talking about the struggle that I have. He's talking about the persecution, about the opposition to the gospel. You see him referring to opponents. We've heard about that in the earlier verses of the first chapter. And we understand even from Acts chapter 16, right in the beginning of the formation of this church, how he was treated so badly and beaten and humiliated publicly, Paul, and this persecution was not new to the Christians of that time, and he was referring to that here. And we remember as well that through the earlier parts of this first chapter, that Paul has just been encouraging them. He's been praying for them. He's been sharing his current situation and circumstances, what's happening in his life at the moment. He's been assessing those situations in light of his overall call for me to live as Christ and to die as gain, and this incredible perspective that he has and filter that he has to look through in all these situations. And he shifts into a different tone now. You see, when he says just one thing, we can see that he is moving into giving an instruction where he's been encouraging and motivating them, where he's been sharing an update of his current situation and what's happening, and sharing his perspective on it. He moves into an instruction now. He says just one thing. And when you say, you talk to someone and you say, I really like the way you did this and that, just one thing. What do you think is coming next? Perhaps a correction even. Perhaps there's a lesson coming. Perhaps there's an area for growth or improvement coming, and we'll see that come through now. And so he says just one thing, and then your ears open up and you say, oh wait, you are ready to receive some sort of instruction or possibly even a correction at this point. And then he gives a basis for what he is going to share. He says, as citizens of heaven. Isn't that an amazing thing? We know Paul was Jewish. We know that he had a strong Jewish background. We know how he was brought up, and we looked at that in earlier episodes, and we looked at his we considered his training, and so we see he was Jewish through and through, but at the same time he was a Roman citizen, and yet he says here, as citizens of heaven. And so many of the people he was writing to would have been Roman citizens themselves, and he's saying, guys, remember, that is not your primary citizenship. It's not a bad thing to be a citizen of a place, and we all are in some way or other. But he says, as citizens of heaven, your primary position, your primary perspective of who you are and where you stand is different now because of what has happened in your heart and in your life. And here he's calling attention to the pilgrim status that we carry as Christians, as saints, as those who are called out, who are set apart for Christ. He is using this understanding, or this reality even, as a basis for his instruction that he's going to be giving them. It's a bit like First Peter, where we see in First Peter the same kind of theme coming through in different ways through the book. Just here's some examples. Verse 17, he says, "You are to conduct yourselves in reverence during your time living as strangers." Not strangers as in you're in a foreign land, in another country, and perhaps that may be a reality for someone, but an even deeper truth is that we are strangers in this world because we, in our inner being, who we are, have been set aside and are citizens of another country, of another world. Here's verse 1 Peter 2, verse 11. It says, he's talking about we're a royal priesthood. If we go back to verse 10, once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. So there was this calling out. You have become another kind of person. You've become God's people, and become part of his nation. You are one of his people now. And he says here then, "Dear friends, I urge you as strangers," and then he adds this, "as and exiles, to abstain from these sinful desires that wage war against your soul." There's this basis that even Peter gives of being strangers and being pilgrims and being exiles in this world. This is not our primary citizenship as a South African, or as an American, or as Zimbabwean, or whatever it may be. Your primary citizenship, if you are in Christ, is that you belong to the King and his kingdom. So as citizens of heaven, he says, live your life worthy of the gospel. Let me just take that phrase a little bit by little bit. He says, live your life. And when we say live your life, he doesn't mean just survive, just breathe, just breathe in and out, and that's all you do. But he's talking about a kind of intentionality. He's calling us to, because you are a citizen of heaven, live your life in a particular way. And when he says live your life, make decisions, be intentional, do things differently because you are a citizen of heaven. And he says, live your life. So be intentional, make decisions, work towards living your life worthy of the gospel of Christ. Worthy. When you say worthy, you can perhaps jump to the wrong conclusion to think he's thinking deserving. But it's not deserving. When he says worthy, he means fitting. He means appropriate. Live your life not in a way to try and earn what you have received, but because you have received something, live in a way that is fitting and appropriate according to what you have been given, and even more so according to who you are, a citizen of heaven. If you are one of those who are in Christ, worthy of the gospel of Christ, fitting to the gospel of Christ. And this gospel of Christ is Christ in you, the hope of glory. It's this remarkable revelation that Jesus has come and made a way that we can be in relationship with God. We as sinful human beings, the price of our sin has been paid for, and there's a righteousness that has been won for us that we put on as clothes and as clean clothing, that we can come and be with God and be in relationship with him. Live your life worthy of the gospel of Christ. Outwork your life, make decisions, be intentional in a way that is fitting with this great gift that has been given to you already. Then he says, live your life worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then whether I come and see you, I will hear, or even if I'm away, I'll hear that you are doing this or that. And worthy of the gospel of Christ looks like something. There's real life application in this. It's not just a theory or something we must just understand, but it's something that is outworked in our life. And he goes on to describe this. It looks like this. And let's just jump back to that passage together so we can look at it. Just one thing: as citizens of heaven, live your life worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then I will hear that you are standing firm in one spirit, in one accord, contending for the faith of the gospel, not being frightened in any way by your opponents. There's this incredible call to stand, and it reminds us of Ephesians chapter 6, and where Paul is calling the Ephesian church to stand in the Lord. And he says, finally, be strengthened by the Lord and by his vast strength. This is Ephesians 6, verse 10 to 14. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil spiritual forces in the heavens. For this reason, take up the full armor of God, so that you may be able to resist the evil day, and having prepared everything, to take your stand. Stand therefore. And he goes on to describe the way we stand in the way we engage in the struggle. We must know, people, that to live a life worthy of the gospel of Christ doesn't just happen. It's not something we fall into. There is a great resistance to it. There is a great tide that is pushing against us, trying to draw us away from this kind of life that is fitting and honoring to God. There is a pull and a draw and a struggle that we are engaged in. And if you have breath in your lungs and Christ in your heart, the struggle rages on. And we need to remember this, and not as a discouragement, but as an encouragement to continue to stand. And once you have stood, once you have resisted, then continue to stand. There is a call for us to stand, and a glory in us standing firm. There is a something of us resisting this and standing firm in the struggle that is glorifying to God and fitting of this great gift of salvation that we have received. There is something in it that demonstrates what has happened in our hearts. There is a God-given endurance that we exercise as we stand firm and as we resist the pull away from God and towards sinfulness and selfishness. And this stand doesn't happen apart. It's not a one man standing on their own, as happened in the Old Testament with some of the great warriors of old. They would stand and withhold a whole army on their own. That would be a picture of Christ standing on our behalf. We stand together with the saints. He says, in one spirit, stand in one accord. There is a unity that we're called to stand together in resistance of this pull and of this push of this pulling of our sinful nature wanting to drive us, this pull of the world and this push of Satan and his schemes and his lies that want to direct us away from God and away from a life that is honoring and glorifying to God. And we need to stand together. And that standing together is not just a good idea of Paul's, but it's God's design, as we are one body and called to stand as one body. Where he says that we are to stand firm in one spirit, contending together. That word contending together is the Greek word sunathlio, sun meaning together, and athleo meaning to compete. You can hear the word athleo like athletic, and it's a competing. It's a wrestling, a struggling, but it's not apart, it's not alone, it's together. There is a God-given design for us to stand together. So we're going to continue with this next time, but for now, let us remember that God has called us as citizens of heaven to a life that is fitting of this great gift of salvation we have received in Christ. And that life looks like standing against the pull towards a sinful, selfish life and a a life of sin and a life of destruction and a life apart from God. It is resisting that and standing firm, but not on our own, standing firm together with other saints so that we might resist, and that in the day of evil we have been prepared and that we would be able to take our stand. So stand therefore. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.